Okay, welcome everybody to Saratoga Whiskey Club tasting number 212. Um, I think I don't remember what number it was, but we have had Paul with us before, and it was probably a couple of years ago now, I want to say, so a little while ago. Um, but Paul Mckendrick is the brand ambassador for Lady of the Glen in Scotland, and he is with us tonight from Scotland, so midnight his time. So we really appreciate the fact that he's staying up to walk us through these seven whiskeys tonight. But I did meet Paul a couple times up in the Space Side once at the independent bottling session, and then I think also last year at the Independent Spirits Festival we ran into each other too. But we're big fans of Lady of the Glen. I think one of the bottles that I remember that really introduced me to Lady of the Glen was a few years ago. There was a Lockendall, I believe, from Bruichladdich, and it was just killer. It was just so awesome. So that's what really got me into the Lady of the Glen world more than anything. But yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Paul, I'm going to let you take over, and then you can do whatever order you want with this tasting lineup. Maybe just talk about um, Lady of the Glen a little bit, and then just let us know what order you want us to do, and we'll use the chat room and we'll chime in with questions and stuff like that. And I have 6 of the 7 bottles still available in the shop, so if anybody's interested, I will put links in the chat room as well. And there's only 1 or 2 of each, so it's not like a big allotment at this point. But if there are more bottles that people want and they're already out online, just let me know and I can reach out to Howard and Melissa and see what we can do in terms of getting more product. But okay, so without further ado, thank you, Paul. Welcome to Saratoga Whiskey Club again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all. It's great to be back. And yeah, any excuse to stay up late, it feels like a novelty for me. So that's no problem at all. It's great to be back and share some whiskies with like-minded people. Those of you who've met me before or have not met me yet, but you'll soon find out that whiskey is a hobby and a passion of mine before it's a job. So that often spills over quite literally into what I do. So no, it's an absolute pleasure to come back. And yeah, I was going to say share some whiskies with you. Unfortunately, I don't have many of these whiskies left that we're talking about. We've long gone from our warehouse, and even the sample stock that I had left might have evaporated. Some thirsty angels round about our warehouse these days, so some of the samples might have disappeared. So I have good memory when it comes to good whiskey, so that's a good thing. Yeah, just in terms of that was my first question off the bat that you've already answered, Charles, about the order, so everyone knows what the whiskies are. There's not just the numbers that you've chosen, so that's absolutely fine. So yeah, my name is Paul. It says brand ambassador on my business card. We are such a small team at Lady of the Glen. There is only 4 of us. Gregor Hanna, who founded the business back in 2012. I joined Gregor back in 2020. And later in 2020, we opened our own warehouse. And just to keep the floors nice and clean, we hired Gavin and Alex. So we're a small team of 4. So you can imagine that, I can't spend all my time as a brand ambassador. Sales is a big part of my job. I have an ADR license as well, which allows me to transport dangerous goods, which comes in handy, especially nice and early tomorrow morning, or later on today, I should say. And this time, I'll be taking some casks down to a warehouse for further maturation. So, brand ambassador, yeah, that's what I'm doing just now. But very many different jobs under my umbrella. But that is one thing that you'll keep hearing from me, that the small team we have and how crucial that is to what we do. It keeps us honest. There's nowhere to hide. Again, having that small team, the small operation that we have, really does make us quite unique in terms of the selection process. We really put a huge amount of value in each and every whiskey that we taste, that we bottle. And yeah, there's no place to hide at the end of the day. There's no filler bottles, there's no filler whiskies that we bottle just to tick boxes that we might need for certain markets. And it's, yeah, mainly due to the size of the business that we are, but also I always imagine that one day, even if we let one slip through the net that we didn't approve, that I might have to be here, in the middle of the night doing a tasting with said whiskey and have no place to hide because I don't have a very good poker face. So, looking at the lineup that we have tonight, I'm confident that each and every one of these whiskies is going to go down really well. So, but anyway, yeah, without further ado, let's get one of the whiskies going. I'd say we should start with the, let's start with the Auchroisk, Auchroisk, or however you want to pronounce it. I don't know the exact right way to pronounce certain whiskies. Being from the central belt of Scotland, we have almost a different language than the Doric language that's spoken up in Speyside, but as far as I'm aware, it's pronounced Auchroisk. I think this is a nice one to start with. Nice, gentle Speyside whiskey, with a secondary maturation in a Manzanilla sherry cask. So, particular theme that you'll see with a lot of our whiskies is that we use secondary casks for further maturation or finishing, which sometimes does the whiskey a disservice in terms of finish, because how long's a finish and how long's a secondary maturation. In the case of this one here, I think we're just over a year in the Manzanilla sherry cask. So, or two, was it 1 year or 2 years? I can't quite remember, but it wasn't a huge length of time anyway. A couple of reasons for that. I think with light, gentle Speyside whiskies like this one here, which do fall into that sort of classic Speyside whiskey category, which, a little part of me dies every time I say that, because when I say that, I'm referring back to the classic Speyside whiskies that we've probably encountered in our lives. The Glenfiddichs, the Glenlivets, Macallans, Balvennies, those kind of whiskies that kind of have that classic Speyside fruitiness, floral, apples and pears as a new make spirit. Auchroisk certainly falls into that category. So, for all intents and purposes, quite a light, gentle whiskey. So we wanted to manage this one really carefully with the secondary maturation. So not a huge length of time in that Manzanilla cask, just enough to give it the hint of the
on the bottle, it says over 2 years. Just
2 years.
Yeah.
It's just when I said a year, I kind of thought, hang on a minute, it's longer than that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, but 2 years, not a long time. In the grand scheme of the 11-year full maturation of this whiskey. But for us, it was just a great example of managing the right type of sherry with the right type of spirit. And something that I will not apologise for saying that I might repeat over and over is that the key for us is balance. Balance between the spirit that the whiskey, with the distillery that distilled that spirit, that house style, that DNA, and the cask maturation, whether it's our maturation or whether we've inherited that cask, is very, very important to us. So that was the key for this one, was just finding that sweet spot between the Speyside character and the sherry. Yeah.
How do you determine how long to finish it? I mean, how often are you tasting it out of the barrel to make sure it's where you want it to be?
Yeah, it's a good question, and easy get out to that question would be, well, every cask is different, every whiskey is different, every influence of that wood is different, even if on paper they're exactly the same. But there is some whiskies that we are more cautious and sensitive with than others, and this one's probably a good example of that. And that's what I was touching on. I think it could easily swamp the distillery character, and that's not something we're all about. So this one we kept in our warehouse. We kept a close eye on it. Tried it, more than we probably should have, just to make sure that we got that sweet spot. And there's other whiskies on this lineup that I'll give you an example of, ones that we could just re-rack into the sherry cask and then just put it away for years before we need to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that comes down to just trial and error and like experience and educated guesswork as well, I suppose, is one way of putting it. Yeah, a big fan of this one. It's to me, it's it's like the art of secondary maturation. In this one, it's not obvious. I think if given this one blind, I might not necessarily automatically go, "Oh yeah, that's been matured in a sherry cask," but it has,
Yep.
and I think that sherry's there. Yeah.
The tasting notes on the bottle say panettone, the Italian cake, cinnamon bark, and honeycomb. So who makes up those tasting notes?
um, yeah, so we all get together every time we're printing labels. We sit down with a little glass of the whiskey, and we all come up with some tasting notes together, and then we put together the ones that we think work best to represent the whiskey between all four of us. I should say though, very interesting when you do read the tasting notes out. Tasting notes is not something I tend to talk about too much, and it's not because I'm against them or I don't think they're valid. We put the tasting notes on the label for the benefit of the unfortunate people who don't have the whiskey in front of them to make up their own mind. So, or to try before you buy.
Right. Nice. It's a beautiful whiskey. I love this one. It's got some bite to it. I mean, it definitely has some heat. It's 57.9% ABV. So it's, but maybe with a drop of water, it might open up a little bit more. And I would suggest trying it with a drop of water,
Yeah,
just to see what it does.
yeah, I think so. Certainly, that's up to the person with the whiskey in front of them. I mean, Lady of the Glen as a brand itself, we're a classic independent bottler. Classic just in the sense of that we don't distill our own whiskey, so we're buying these casks in and sourcing them from distilleries, from brokers. Anyone who wants to sell us a cask of whiskey, and if we like that whiskey and it ticks a lot of boxes for us, then we'll put it into our label. Lady of the Glen's the brand that we created for our best whiskies, basically the ones that we have identified as single cask that stood out amongst other casks. So whenever you see Lady of the Glen and all the Lady of the Glen whiskies we're going to try tonight, two things that you can guarantee. Well, three things. One, delicious whiskey, but also the fact that they're from one single cask. So, the product of just one barrel, whether that was 100 bottles, 200 bottles, whatever it may be. And you touched on there, Charles, the cask strength. So 57.9 is not the ABV that we say you should drink that whiskey at. That's what ABV the cask had matured that whiskey to. And many of the whiskies that we bottle leave our warehouse, and we know fine well that they really benefit from some water, but we don't have the opportunity to explain that to everyone. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Anybody
I think
add a drop? Anybody have any different thoughts on it with water or?
Don't have any left.
Oh, okay. We're using a straw.
It might have sweetened it up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a typical thing to happen as the sweetness comes out. I think if it's a really intense, say, secondary maturation where the oak is quite intense, I think the ABV can bring a bit of sweetness, and then you add water, and it does the opposite, where it brings out the tannins in the oak, or certainly opens up the palate to be able to bring in those tannins. But I think with this one here, and again, I'll back to a lot of the points I was making about this one being quite subtle in terms of the sherry influence. I think, yeah, you're more likely to bring more of the Speyside character back out. Touched on it earlier on about the apples, pears, and the floral character from that Speyside whiskey. And again, what that's to do with the actual type of sherry. I'm not an expert by any means on sherry, but Manzanilla is made by the coast. It's typically quite light compared to your Olorosos and Palo Catardos. So it's already got that lighter influence, and that little bit of saltiness that it brings from that coastal character, a wee bit of salinity, which actually we thought would be a bit of fun to see if we could bring some saline salinity to a Speyside whiskey, and I think we got that. I didn't bring that up because I think we're very suggestible. If I say you're tasting a little bit of salty sherry nuttiness in there, then yeah, all of a sudden that's what you're getting from your glass. But yeah, that's.
I was just going to ask that about Manzanilla, just to kind of clarify what the kind of where on the scale it fits. So it's on the lighter side Would you say that there's some like I mean, I know on the bottle it mentions cinnamon. I mean, I'm definitely getting kind of like a you know, a cinnamony note to this. Is that from the Manzanilla, or is that from the original cask?
I would say, yeah, I would say that's definitely, it's not a classic tasting note I get from Speyside. So yeah, I would
Yeah.
suggest that whatever made distinct cinnamon on the day was certainly coming from that secondary maturation. Now,
Okay.
there's a few things to consider there. For me, this one is definitely a lot to do with the sherry influence, but on many occasions with secondary maturation, you're talking about more active oak as well. I
Mhm.
think we'll cover that with a few of the whiskies later on. You know, where you get a lot more of the fresh oak compared to the previous contents. It does add to that something as well, but this one is very much led by the sherry as well, which is quite nice. It's quite reassuring because many of the Oloroso casks that we source, Pedro Jimenez casks that we source from really good quality bodegas in Spain and Portugal, fantastic influence of that ex wine that was in there, but you also get a huge wave of tannins from the oak.
Mm.
And I'm going to put out a bold statement, and one that I think I can stand by, that many of the big sherry bombs that you get out there just now, without naming names, a lot of that colour and a lot of that flavour is actually the oak more than the previous contents that were in that cask, due to that freshness. Because many of the casks we source now are they're seasoned casks; they're not actually, you know, genuinely used for the maturation of that wine that was in there before. They're made for Scotch, so you know some better than others. You know, some are literally just washed on the inside with the sherry, whatever it may be, and then emptied out and then shipped to Scotland. We certainly try and work with the best bodegas we can, the ones that are really seasoning the casks for a minimum of 12 months, and we get that perfect influence from that wine coming through. This one being a good example.
How hard is it to get a non-seasoned cask these days?
Um,
Is it all about
Probably,
relationships and
yeah. I mean, there's so many caveats to that.
yeah.
Not as difficult as you would think, but you've got to ask yourself: is that really what you want? Because sherry, for example, if they aren't using casks to mature sherry or port, you're not wanting too much oak. You know, the wineries they don't want too much oak tannins in that wine, so they're mostly using refill or reusing casks for decades. You know, so we do source some, and we've bottled some recently. We managed to source from a really good bodega called Hidalgo, well known
Yeah.
bodega in Spain. And those casks took 3, 4, 5, 6 years sometimes to get any kind of influence from that cask. And it was so subtle, but beautifully balanced as well at the same time. You know, compared to some of the Oloroso casks we're getting just now, where even after 6 months, the colour is insane.
Right.
And, you know, we're really trying to find that sweet spot where we don't lose the distillery character at the same time.
Great. That was a great dram to start with.
Yeah. Well, the perfect one to follow that for me then would be the Blair Athol, if you want to try that one next. The reason I'm suggesting this one, although we're moving from Speyside down to the Highlands, the Southern Highlands in this case, Blair Athol it's a Highland whiskey, but it's not got the same body backbone structure as some of the big more powerful Highland whiskies. But here we have, is it the one that's matured in Amontillado? Can I just check that before I proceed?
Yes.
Amontillado, good.
Amontillado Barrique finish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, the reason why I wanted to go with this one after is because, again, the sherry styles are similar with your Manzanilla and Amontillado. Amontillado doesn't quite have the same salinity. It's not produced by the sea, but it's on that lighter, drier, more aperitif style of sherry. But big difference in this one. We were in that cask for over 6 years. So, it's an 11-year-old whiskey and it's been in there for more than half of its life. So, hence the little disclaimer I put near the start there about the when does it become a secondary maturation versus a finish. We use the term finish more often than not because it's the most widely understood way of explaining what happens. You know, you're taking whiskey from one cask into another cask, but when it's been in there for more than half its life, come on, Scotch Whisky Association, help us out here. give us something to really showcase that. So you'll see right away this one is a much heavier, more weighty whiskey. Now that 6 years has really made a difference with this one. So we're talking a lot more of the oak influence as well as that Amontillado bringing, you know, waves of nuttiness, a nice toffee, honey character, but just that little bit extra weight in body and that spirit coming from Blair Athol.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's not one of the bigger, meatier, heavier Highland whiskies, but compared to the Auchroisk before, we have some more fuller structure, fuller body that can really stand up to the secondary maturation, and hence the reason why 6 years. It's a long time. It's a lot longer than we ever thought it would go, but we brought it in after 4 years. So this was one we knew we could re-rack, moved it down to the other warehouse, forgot about it for 4 years, brought it back up, thinking, well, even 4 years is quite a long time, but we were fairly confident that this was going to be able to stand up to it. But we left it because we weren't quite ready to bottle whiskey from that cask. I can't remember exactly why. We had either bottled a Blair Athol recently, or we had bottled a whiskey from Amontillado recently, and we thought, we'll just hold on. But having it in our warehouse, we knew we could keep a close eye on it. And long story short, it just kept getting better and better and better to the point where even when we were ready to bottle a Blair Athol 11-year-old from an Amontillado cask, we thought, let's just hold on to this because, you know, you can imagine it on a graph and you know where it was when it came in, and it just kept getting better, and we tasted it and it was still on that same trajectory. So why stop that? Until we got to the point where we tasted it one more time and we all agreed that it was just getting that little bit on the fence where we could really taste the cask, the oak, the tannins coming through, that was starting to just take over a little bit of that wonderful sweetness from the sherry and, of course, the Blair Athol character as well. Yeah, I like your tasting notes there, Charles, with the coffee and the cocoa. That's definitely a tasting note that I remember getting from that.
I think the previous Blair Athol that we had was a wine barrique, which was also really fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
I love Blair Athol's spirit. I mean, like you said, it's not super heavy, but it definitely has some body to it, and it's just such a great spirit. Definitely one of those like hidden gems that people still don't really know about, even though they stop there and visit the distillery on their way up north. But yeah.
It's the almost perfect paradox of whiskey these days, to be honest. The fact that you have this distillery that's one of, must be in the top 5 most visited distilleries in Scotland, which as you mentioned, it's location more than anything else, where your distillery owners, and I'm not one of these people who like to, you know, pick on the evil empire that is Diageo. They look after us very well and they look after Scotch whisky very well, but you know, you think about the footfall that distillery has, but yet they don't have the need or want to invest in a proper core range for this distillery.
Right.
Which is absolutely fine because we can do that. We can take, as you mentioned, great spirit that is to work with.
Yeah.
And what makes it a great spirit for me is it's not necessarily jumping out with character, but it's one of a handful of distilleries that, as an independent bottler, we see as the perfect blank canvas. You know, that as an artist would have a perfect blank canvas to start, you know, something really special with, and it just gives you that perfect starting point. That, to be honest, most secondary maturations or finishes we work with tend to come out very well, and you know, we hence the reason why we could just put in the cask and put it away for 4 years and know that it would be fine.
Nice. Yeah. This is a great whiskey.
Good.
Almost like desserty in a way, you know. It just kind of has that after dinner kind of taste to it, but in a good way.
That's why I said I called it an alcoholic flan.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
It's a good description.
Are you the alcoholic, Shalom, or the or the flan. Just kidding. Just kidding. I don't want to get my shop partner in trouble here.
Yes to both.
You'll be interested to see if there's any difference with water, addition of water with this one. This one could be the opposite, where it gets a little bit drier with some water. Again, bringing out 6 years worth of oak tannins.
Delicious.
Good.
I love Blair Athol. I don't know. There's been very few bottlings that I've had from them that don't hit the mark. But even their cask fill, bottlings out of the shop, they're pretty great.
Yeah, a lot of people give the Diageo a hard time, but they're the one expression that you can get on a regular basis is the 12-year-old in the Flora and Fauna.
Okay, yeah.
Which to me, it's not a bad whiskey. It just has the distillery has so much potential, and I find that I struggle to understand that they choose that for their way of expressing the distillery. But you mentioned there is some great distillery exclusive bottlings that you can pick up at the distillery.
Yeah.
So it's good, and again, it's many people's first sort of venture towards whiskey. If you are visiting Scotland, it's just so easily accessible.
Yeah.
And I can understand why they have an accessible whiskey as well to represent. But
I mean, they do a good tour. It's a beautiful campus.
Yeah.
It's a great stop right on the way. So
yeah, I mean, we were tasting in the warehouse today some Blair Athols. We have some Octaves. Some Octaves. We're going to try some Octaves tonight as well. Little 40 or 50 litre casks. And we noticed that we had 4 Blair Athols from 2013 that have been in these little Octaves, refill Octaves. Wow. So they've had other whiskey in there before, thankfully. But they've been in there for about a year and a half now. And immediately the warning bells ring like, oh my goodness, that's quite a long time in this tiny little cask that, things happen 4 times faster than they do in a full-size cask. But, the tropical fruit notes that are coming through in those little Octaves now are absolutely insane. And that's that Blair Athol saying, I'm going to fight back against this time in this little cask. And you know what? I'm going to take your oak tannins and I'm going to turn them into tropical fruit. And it was like, we were all looking outside and it was raining, typical, August in Scotland, sideways rain, happy summer. But this dram in our hands was just absolutely transporting us to a tropical beach. So nice. Yeah, that's testament to Blair Athol.
Nice, good stuff. All right, you guys ready to move to number 3? Yeah, sure. Okay. Where are we going?
Good question. I'm just pouring myself another dram as well. Not on brand, unfortunately.
That's okay.
Right, so what we're going to have, Blair Athol. So, let's go with the Teaninich 11-year-old. Was that the exclusive Octave?
Yes. U.S. market exclusive.
Perfect. Yeah.
Ex-Peated Islay Octave.
Yeah. Okay.
Finished.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not afraid of a little bit of peat or smoke at this point in the tasting. It's quite subtle anyway. But yeah, again, like Blair Athol, talking about distilleries that act as a perfect blank canvas. Just above Blair Athol on that list, you have Teaninich. Again, one of these ones that my pronunciation of the distillery has changed over the years, and it's not because I've went out to do any major market research. It's literally someone from that area shouting something back at me at a tasting or a whiskey festival, as the Highlanders like to pick on us Ouija's, as they were called from Glasgow. So I was always calling it Teaninich, putting far too much emphasis on the T at the start, T-E-A, as in the drink. But apparently it's Teaninich. So I'll take the word for it. But anyway.
So how do you say it? Teaninich?
Teaninich. It's almost like it's T-I-N rather than T-E-A.
Teaninich.
Teaninich, yeah. And I was saying it too slow. Believe it or not, someone from close to Glasgow was saying something too slow, which I've never heard that in my life. I've been 44 years now on this earth, and I've never been told I speak too slow. Anyway, So, yeah, wonderful opportunity to talk about this US exclusive that, thanks to our importers at Melissa and Howard Sachs at Sachs Dynamics and Scotch Drinkers Only, selected this wonderful little octave to bring the entire outrun of the cask, which I can't remember, but I'm guessing it was around 50 to 60 bottles. Can you?
55.
55 bottles, all of which went to your market, which is fantastic. I love doing that, and that's exactly why we like working with these little octaves, because other than the fact that they produce some incredible whiskey, something completely unique in terms of, you know, that limited run, but also flavour profile, everything else about them is a complete pain in the backside. You know, the size of them, the effort we've got to go to, and the amount of times I've got a huge cut in my shin because they sit just at the perfect height when you're not looking properly and you're walking around the warehouse after a few drams and they just hit that sweet spot just below your knee. Many a swear word has been passed around the warehouse, these little casks, but thankfully the liquid that comes from them is excellent. So what we have here is the Teaninich. It's 11 years old, and for just about a year spent in an octave that once previously held whiskey from Kalila Distillery on Islay. So we thought we'd have a little bit of fun with this one, you know, taking an unpeated and a non-smoky whiskey that's matured most of its life in just a hogshead, just a classic refill hogshead that 85 to 90% of all Scotch whisky is maturing in Scotland in refill hogsheads, you know, third, fourth, sometimes fifth fill whiskies that casks that have had whiskey in there before, and put it into this octave that had a peaty whiskey in there before, just to add layers of flavour. And again, we have our own warehouse, something that's hugely important to us. This being a good example of where we could happily keep an eye on this whiskey, try it every single Monday if we had to, you know, which we do often, open casks at 9:30 or 9:35 on a Monday morning, sensitive casks like this one, just to make sure that the flavours are going in the right direction. And then if they're not, we can week it out just in time to save that whiskey. But this one worked very, very well. Again, Teaninich being that great blank canvas, as I mentioned before, to offer just a space for these whiskies to you know, add some wonderful flavours on top of that. So hopefully you're getting a little bit of smokiness in there. It is just very, very subtle. For me, whenever you add a non-peated whiskey to a cask that had peated whiskey in there before, it's not the same as like an Islay whiskey where you have that smoke integrated right through the spirit from day one. You know, the barley is the thing that's been smoked, so therefore right through the whole process, that smoke is integrated into that spirit. But here, the best way to describe it for me is like you've added a layer on top of the flavours that are already there. So don't always get it on the nose, you don't always get it on that first initial palate, but it will always come back in the finish. And for me, that's where I get the smoke in this one as well.
It's just a very slight phenol. I mean, it's just kind of in the back. I mean, if you're a non-PD fan, you're really not going to get much out of this.
Yeah.
But I mean, and Kalila is a lighter, you know, medium peat anyhow. So
yeah. And before that, this would have been a fresh Pedro Jimenez octave, seasoned with the sweetest, stickiest sherry you can. And the wonderful thing about these octaves is we get huge value for money with them. I always joke to say that, we're based in the region of Fife. That's Dalgety Bay is our home. And apparently, people from Fife are quite tight with money. You know, I can only go with what I've heard. So now that we're in Fife, we thought we'd just fit in with everyone and reuse these little octaves, you know, 3, 4, 5 times. And they keep giving. They are the gift that keeps giving, nice. Obviously due to the size of the cask. But yes, so this one was an ex-Pedro Jimenez octave that we put the Kalila in there for. We would have bottled this wonderful Kalila that would have been really dark, rich, sweet, smoky. And then we put the Teaninich in there quickly after that. And you'll see that there is still, I think, a little bit of the sherry influence there. It certainly has the colour, if I remember right. Yep. And you've got that sweetness, that subtle, you know, kind of fruit and berries and then that smoke on top of it as well. So yeah, something really unique. I don't imagine there would be many bottles of this left over. The 50, 55, did you say, to begin with? And I think this has been over for a few months now. So
I love it.
yeah, I'm glad it worked. They don't always work, the peated finishes on non-peated whiskies, but this one certainly helped.
Oh yeah, Melissa's saying that, or maybe it's Howard. One of them are saying, I believe we had the Kalila Octave on our last Lady of the Glen Whiskey Club tasting.
Yeah, it could well be the same Octave as well. I think that might be part of the reason why we chose this one together.
That's cool.
Because the previous contents were the Kalila that was also an exclusive for the US. So yeah.
Oh, Ari says tasting number 168, November of 2024. All right.
Yeah.
Wow.
We've done a few tastings since then, but keep rolling.
Yeah, that's good record keeping that.
Amazing what happens when you don't delete emails.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was fun. That was a good one.
It seems to be some good feedback on this one. That's good.
Yeah. Dennis, did that overpower you with Pete? So. All right. We're on Islay. Dennis loves the peat, and then we get off Islay, and the peat just, kills him. So it's okay. It's okay.
Well, that just shows you. I mean, I've got many whiskies that I've tried at a distillery, and you think it's incredible, and you taste that whiskey in a bar or take a bottle home, and there's something missing when you don't have the place. It's very, very hard to explain that to someone with a glass of whiskey in their hand that this whiskey would taste completely different in a different location. But the one way I found recently to describe that is if you have a whiskey, pour that whiskey in your home and have a few sips, then go outside, sit outside in the fresh air, and I guarantee you that whiskey has a different back feeling to it. I'm not saying it necessarily changes the taste, but you appreciate it in a different way. There's different flavour compounds that come through in different locations. So, that I don't let science do too much to talking. To me, there's a lot of magic in whiskey. I'm sure science could answer those questions, but I don't even want to ask that question to science because there is a lot of magic that happens. Even with our years of experience and the combined knowledge that we have as a team, every now and then we do get a surprise that we weren't expecting, or we planned for some end result that completely shifted and went on a different direction, which is not always a bad thing. And having our own warehouse, this whiskey is a perfect opportunity to bring up the importance of that. Gregor Hanna founded the business back in 2012, and for 8 years he was working by himself. I joined the team in March of 2020. But later in that year, August, we took the keys to our little warehouse in the little town of Dalgetty Bay in Fife. And what a huge difference that's made to our business at that time, especially because being very adventurous, very experimental and ambitious with the cask types that we use, it is very difficult when you don't have full control of the whiskey that's been re-racked and then when you want to bottle that. And especially in that time where bottling hogs that we were using suddenly went from 2 months lead time before bottling, meaning you've got to give them full notice of everything you want bottled 2 months in advance, to almost 8 months. So a huge jump in a short space of time, and that really put a barrier up to how creative and adventurous we could be. Because 8 months is a long time if you want to take a gamble on whether a certain spirit is going to work well in a certain type of cask. So having complete autonomy in their warehouse to keep an eye on these casks, and more importantly, if we feel that cask has done the best it possibly can and we have that balance at that perfect point, we could bottle that whiskey the next day just to really capture that moment. So it's made a huge difference to what we do. But these octaves, like you have in your glass just now, we have a huge program of octaves. We've got at least 30 on the go just now. And each one of them is it's like a hyperactive maturation. It's really, they really have quite an intense effect on the spirit. So we have to really keep a close eye on them to capture that moment. But also, what a wonderful experience for customers to come and visit. And if they want to pick a private cask for themselves, they can pick out one of these little octaves, and we can put, the company name or for a certain market on that label. So it offers us that element to be dynamic as well.
Keep that in mind.
Yes, we do. Only certain customers, of course, the ones we let in the door. We've got octaves that are, like the best whiskies you have, the ones at the back of the cabinet that you keep in the back until the in-laws have left the house.
Right.
Yeah, we have octaves for people. Okay. I'm thinking we should go to, let's do the Deanston next, if you have that one, the Pedro Jimenez quarter cask. Especially while we're talking about
this is the one that's sold out, just FYI. But there might be a possibility of getting more.
Yeah, so this one was bottled last year around about this time, because this one was part of our Samhain series, or spelled Samhain, which is fresh in our minds just now because we are just in the process of bottling quarter 3 released just now, which is again another one of our Samhain series, which is it's a little tangent on the classic Lady of the Glen packaging, where we've worked with a local illustrator who we've known for many years, Stephen Shandy. Yep, there you go. Who has worked in the whiskey industry, but his main talent is illustrations. And we teamed up with him to come up with a little limited series where we celebrate some Scottish myths and legends, which is a lot of fun, coming up with these wonderful little interesting stories that tie in with the distillery or the name or the location of where that whiskey's from, and just celebrating the opportunity to do something different. So this one's from Deanston Distillery, which is not far from me, only about 20 minutes drive from here. Wonderful little distillery that's situated next to the river. It used to be an old mill, so it's quite unique in its look. It doesn't look like a classic whiskey distillery, it has its wonderful charm. But again, we're back into that sort of lighter Highland style whiskey, even lighter than the Blair Athol. This is all very much kind of grassy, floral flavours that come from this spirit. But we purchased a cask from a broker who, we knew the cask was quite low fill. It was a hogshead that had either leaked or been part bottled, but we bought that cask anyway. And then we had a fresh Pedro Jimenez quarter cask, which is about 115 to 120 litres, and seasoned with Pedro Jimenez. So again, back to that really sweet, sticky sherry. And we put the Deanston in there and just had a bit of fun with this one. Now, this is probably an example of sometimes where we kind of break our own rules. We like to stick to our rules if it benefits the outrun, but every now and then we see a whiskey cross over that barrier from balanced to unbalanced, but something just works with it. And so we don't argue with it. We just let it go. And this one just kept getting better and better. Bearing in mind that we've all got a really sweet tooth. So this one was definitely ticking that box, of the sweetness. So it just kept getting better without turning into some sort of, cheap liqueur. That was what we were quite worried about. But it was, a classic Christmas cake, raisins, toffee, runny honey, all the wonderful things about this one here. It was a quarter cask, which is part of the reason why it's probably sold out. We wouldn't have had many bottles from this. I think maybe 100 and I'm just guessing. I think it must be about 150 bottles we might have got from this. And based on the colour, based on the maturation, it was very, very popular when we released the list. Quite a low ABV, if I remember right. Can you help me there, Charles? Is that one?
Yep, it is 49.7.
Yeah, so the ABV was already quite low when we got the cask in. So again, I think this was probably a leaking cask where just, over the years in a warehouse, just a few drips every day to the point where there was only half the cask left, but then oxidised, so the ABV came down. Yeah, so just a bit of fun. I think this one worked really well. The story on the label relates to the area of Scotland is apparently one of the most where you get most UFO sightings. So we've put on the label, which I don't think you would be able to get across if you even if you put that label back up onto the screen there, because it's quite a dark label. But there's a little UFO sucking out some of
There's
the
the
things
UFO.
from the top left. It's like sucking out the all the shopping trolleys and the traffic cones that were in the river next to the next to the distillery. I think one of the poor warehouse workers is getting soaked up there as well. So
Nice.
yeah, that's the kind of fun we're having just now, designing the labels for the new release, which again will be one of the Samhain series for this year. So all the whiskies are bottled for Q3, and we're literally today sitting down with Stephen going through the final drafts of the illustrations and the stories, and some incredible whiskies coming out very soon.
Nice.
In that same label type, but again, complete novel stories that go with the whiskies as well.
It's awesome.
Good.
This is delicious. I love, Deanston, similar to Blair Athol, underrated to a degree. Unfortunately, the expressions that we see here in the US from the distillery aren't, incredible. They're fine, but they're not as representative of what they're really doing there. So whenever you get an independent bottling of Deanston, which is, you don't see a lot of that, for one. I mean, I haven't seen many Deanstons IBs before. It's a special treat. So
Yeah,
really
the industry's like that. I think in the 13 years now, I've been working in the independent bottling side of whiskey, mostly entirely for small companies. And it is funny how you do see phases like that where distilleries will release stocks. And I suppose it brings up a question that a lot of people ask at tastings, as to how independent bottling works and why on earth distilleries would sell you casks of whiskey. And there's a long answer to that, but I suppose the short answer is every distillery at some point overproduces or has an excess of certain stocks of certain vintages. And every company is out there to make money, so it's a way of liquidizing stock. So again, a question that's asked a lot: why would they sell you that cask in particular, whatever cask it may be? Is it because they didn't like it? It didn't fit their house style? Well, 99% of the time, the distillery selling casks is not selling it because they've tried that whiskey and thought, nah, we don't like this. It's just simply a case of, on a spreadsheet of their stock, they have an excess of 2013, 2016, whatever it may be, and they liquidise that stock. And many times we buy in casks of whiskey, whether they're 5, 6, 15 years old, and we can tell by looking at the bung at the top of the cask that has never been opened throughout its entire life. It's never been tasted until that moment that we open that cask. And yeah, great point. In the 12 years that I've been working with this side of the industry, it's only in the last, well, not this year, but last year that we got offered some Deanston. And it is a rare treat to be able to see Deanston offered out. And that's gone. I've not seen much of it. We've not been offered any apart the parcel that we bought a couple of years ago. I think we've got maybe 6 or 7 casks of different vintages. So we've been, working with a few of them. We've bottled an Octave, a Deanston from an Octave for the US market fairly recently. That's actually one of my favourite whiskies that we've bottled in the last couple of years. I really loved that cask that Howard and Melissa chose. And again, just showing how versatile the distillery is. But yeah, completely unique. So you're right. Yeah, if there's not been many Deanstons around, and we're getting precious about it now because, like I said, we got a few and we've not seen them offered out recently. And that happens. It swings and rounds. We're in an interesting time for the whiskey industry just now. And I would have, if 5 years ago, if someone said to me that in 2026 you would be offered some casks of Bowmore and Laphroaig, I would have said, no, you're having a laugh. That's never going to happen. Those whiskies are far too precious to Beam Suntory. But yet here we are. They're in a position where they need to sell some stocks, and independent bottlers say thank you very much. and
mean,
all of a
that
sudden
says something.
you're the best friend.
That says something about where we're at as an industry too, right? I mean,
100%, yeah.
yeah. I mean, we see the numbers, especially like the Agio numbers and all of that. I mean, there's no question that they want to get some more money somehow.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the history of the industry has always been like that, and I think that people are comparing, where we were a few years ago, but it has to be with the caveat of COVID. COVID distorted everything, and many things in life, of course. But for the whiskey industry, it was a good time, in terms of people buying more whiskey and drinking more during those tough times. But it's distorted the pattern of the growth and the decline.
First Fill Spirits turned 5 years old this month, if it wasn't for COVID. So there you go.
Yeah, it certainly changed a lot. And I mentioned before that I joined this company back in March of 2020. The 5th of March, to be precise. I had a interview with Gregor at the famous Pot Still Bar in Glasgow, my favourite whiskey bar in Glasgow. And we had a chat about the job, and a few pints of beer and a few drams and a kebab on the way home, and I had a new job. But of course, March of 2020 brought a few other interesting dynamics to our life as the month went on. And of course, at the start of a global pandemic, most of my friends and family were saying, "You're crazy to change jobs at this time. Surely you're going to go back to your old boss and ask for that resignation letter back." And it's like, well, Gregor assures me my job is safe, no matter what happens. And anyway, 5 weeks we'll be back to normal. So what are we worrying about? Anyway, I'm still here, so something was going okay. And thanks to Zoom tastings like we have here, we were able to reach out and still be able to do our job even from a distance. So it was a good year for us in terms of the business, like both in terms of Gregor taking on myself and being able to offer my skills and just the fact that I'm dedicated to doing this job, that I can let him go and run the business, but also I mentioned before about getting the keys to our warehouse in August of 2020. So it was a big year in many, many ways.
Yeah, nice. All right. So what are we doing now? We're going to go into some smoke, or I mean, St. Bridget's, that's
well,
where do we go with that?
Let's go with this St. Bridget's, then it'll give me a chance to explain a little bit about that as well.
Okay.
I think the Peated Highland was where I was going to go next, but I think we'll go with the St. Bridget's Kirk. So yeah, Lady of the Glen is our main brand. It has been the main brand that Gregor created back in 2012. As an independent bottler, we have to create a brand, which is the main focus of our branding, our marketing, our label, and the most prominent part of the label. So we have Lady of the Glen at the top, and that forms the main focus of the label. And then under that, we can have the distillery name. So Lady of the Glen is the brand that we created, or Gregor created, and it's even today it remains the primary brand, the focus that we basically do most of our work towards. But a few years ago, we had a look at the stocks we have, our portfolio, and noticed that we had some stocks of blended Scotch whisky that we had been sitting on for a while. And the only reason it hadn't been bottled yet is because Lady of the Glen, the only brand we had at the time, the packaging is all based around single malt and single grain whiskies. So in order to bottle these blended whiskies, we had to create a new brand. And so, like the story of Lady of the Glen, which I can go into, but basically it's tied around Gregor's history and something that's connected to his past. We wanted to celebrate having our home in Dalgety Bay with something local to be the main focus of the new brand for the blends. However, Dalgety Bay is not exactly full of charm. It's a nice little town, but it's a commuter town for Edinburgh. So it has lots of nice houses, nice place to live, but you have a couple of pubs, a couple of shops, a fish and chip shop, a supermarket, and that's it. Except for right down on the waterfront, right down at the beach, you have the medieval ruined church that's called St. Bridget's Kirk. So wonderful old church that's well overgrown now. Most of the walls have come down. A lot of the headstones in the graveyard are all fallen over, but it has this wonderful eerie charm about it. But even more importantly, for a very short period of time, the town of Dunfermline, just up the road from our office, was the capital of Scotland. And the transition of Dunfermline to Edinburgh, Dalgety Bay was the main landing point for any boats that were crossing the Firth of Forth. Dalgety Bay is the perfect little shelter bay, and that's why they built the St Bridget's Kirk, the church, the chapel there. So the history of that place must be incredible. The amount of people that crossed that, the important people that crossed that water and landed there, really captured our imagination. So anyway, anything that we bottle as a blend comes into the St Bridget's Kirk branding. So we have 3 different colours. I'm not going to lie, we were inspired or copying, what way you want to put it, the wonderful branding of Johnnie Walker. Johnnie Walker being the biggest selling Scotch whisky in the world. And how do they differentiate the different styles of Johnnie Walker? By colour. You have red label, black label, green label, and blue label, and a couple others as well. But it really helps understand the difference between that style of whisky. So we were inspired by that. So we have, originally we have a blue label, which is for blended malt. We have a red label, which is for blended Scotch, so a mix of malt and grain. And the one that Charles just held up there is a kind of brown label that we have for our completely unique Solera system that is the only fully working Solera system in Scotch whisky, which I'll stand by until someone corrects me otherwise. The word Solera is used quite a lot in Scotch whisky, mainly by Glen, who back in 1998 built a massive vat where they filled it up with about 40,000 litres of 15-year-old whisky. And even to this day, every bottle of 15-year-old Glenfiddich is their Solera reserve, where they empty half of that vat and bottle that, and then they fill it back up with more 15-year-old whisky. And the magic is that it's never ever emptied. So there's some whisky in that vat somewhere, molecules of that whisky that have been in there since 1998. And so a lot of other whisky companies use that same concept where they never empty the cask, so it's always just getting half emptied and then topped back up again. But we wanted to try and incorporate the actual system that they have, where the original name comes from, which is the sherry industry in Spain, where you have a pyramid of casks and they bottle the wine from the bottom layer, but they only empty half of it out, and then they top up that from the layer above, and then so on from the layer above, and then they put the very new wines in right at the top. Again, the main reason they do that is so that the casks are never emptied, so therefore there's always a little bit of older wine in every one of those casks. But it's also for a bit of consistency as well. So why did we do that? Well, it sounded like fun. It sounded like a project that we could all get our teeth into. But it was actually mainly driven because we had 7 250-litre hogsheads of this same blended malt whisky that we didn't really know what to do with. Not because it was bad whisky, but because 7 casks of the exact same liquid is far too much for us to do anything with in one bottling. So we thought, how can we deal with these 7 casks of whisky? Well, we could create a batch system. And the first idea we come up with is to put one of each of the casks into a sherry cask, into a port cask, into a rum cask, and then bottle each of these whiskies so that the whiskey geeks out there, including myself, could taste the same core original product but with different finishes on there. But that's been done before. It's not original. It's been done by a few other independent bottlers. But the idea of creating a Solera system where we can pass this whisky through the Solera system and bottle it in small batches being emptying the end cask by half and then topping it up from the one next to it, so as we can create this batch system where you can see the difference from batch 1 to, well, we're now on to batch 6, but you guys have got batch 5 in front of you there, to see how this whisky progresses as it flows through the Solera system. Okay, there's a lot of information there. I can keep going, but let's just taste the whisky and then I'll come back to the finer details later on.
So it's
so
just the
basically-
same. It's just the same hogsheads throughout. There's no added finish at all or anything. It's just
Well, from the inception of the Solera system over 2.5 years ago now, the component whiskies that go into the blend have never changed
okay.
until we run out, which we will run out one day, and then we'll have to rethink what we do with the Solera. The only thing that's changing from each batch is the fact that it's going through the Solera system from top to bottom. So most of it that we've tasted so far has just been time served in that Solera system, running through the 3 different types of sherry casks that we have in the Solera system. So for extreme examples, batch 1 that we bottled was all about the sherry, because these were fresh Oloroso and Fino casks that are in this Solera system. So first whiskey that went in there, the first thing that's going to hit that whiskey is the in drink from the wine coming back out into the blend that's there. Fino 1 at the top and 2 Olorosos at the bottom. And then slowly, as we went through the batches, the sherry influence came down a little bit, but what you had was more influence from the oak from the time in that Solera system that's gradually been marrying together as it went through. So the actual component whiskies, again, trying to cut long stories short, but basically, before we had our own warehouse, we had to send our casks down to the warehouse that was storing our whiskies to re-rack these whiskies. And we would send them down, 60 full casks, 60 empty casks, sherry and port and, Bordeaux wines for them to re-rack into for us. And inevitably, you would have a 250-litre cask getting re-racked into a 200-litre cask. You would have remnants left over. So the warehouse came back to us and they said, what should we do with these leftover remnants? Well, we didn't really know, so just grab some empty casks, just put it all together, and then we'll worry about it later. And eventually that later came. We had 7 casks of this same blend of 5 or 6 different whiskies. That's how it came about in the first place, why we had this liquid. So in terms of the whiskies that are in there, nothing too outstanding. Solid classic whiskies that form a big part of what we do. So you're thinking Inchgower, Ben Rennes, some Teaninich in there as well. There's some Blair Athol. There's a little bit of Kalila in there, but there's some Ben Nevis as well. So if you're getting quite a bit of peat and smoke, that'll be from the Ben Nevis, which is heavily peated Ben Nevis. Ben Nevis is a distillery that produced both peated and unpeated whiskey, but we bought some peated Ben Nevis spirit that went into this as well. In terms of age, you won't see an age on this whiskey. 2 reasons for that. The main reason, the priority reason, is because the Scotch Whisky Association, who we value the work that they do, we are members of the Scotch Whisky Association. Their main role is to protect the integrity and the premium name that is Scotch whisky. So they have a sort of cap on innovation, would be one way of putting it. But they're also very on top of anything that's really challenging the boundaries of Scotch whisky, which this certainly would have done. So we approached them, we asked them what they thought about what we were going to do. They immediately came back and were quite worried about the thought of having an age on there, but also the problem is we can't insinuate at all that this whisky is maturing in the Solera system, because we are topping this cask up every time we bottle it, so that you can't have that as a maturation. So there's no age on the bottle. Of course, I can tell you what whiskies are in there, and the oldest whiskies in this blend are probably about 14 or 15 years old just now. And the youngest part, which is the Ben Nevis, is probably approaching about 8 years old just now. And there's some bits in between there as well. We can't have an age on there, and we can't have anything on the label that suggests that this whiskey is maturing. But if I was to give you a glass of whiskey from batch 1 and a glass of the one you've got in front of you just now, batch 5, which is 2.5 years in the making, you tell me if this whiskey is not matured. And the way I would answer that is, yes, we can't say that this whiskey is getting older or maturing in the Solera, but we also can't stop time. we don't have some magic time machine or crystal ball that can stop time. So anyway, I'll leave that up to your imagination. But this is just a wonderful little product, so unique, so special, really special to us. We didn't want to charge too much for this. You can see the price. It's a fantastic whiskey for the money. And as I say, that unique aspect just gives it so much premium value to something that won't be around forever as well. So,
Can I ask you, so what's happening to the ABV over time in the Solera?
Yeah, I'm just getting to that one. So the ABV, this is unlike Lady of the Glen, this one we have reduced this down to 48.5. So every batch has been 48.5. And the reason we chose that is mainly because, well, certainly we're going to do it one day, is have every batch and a glass of each just to see how it's progressed throughout the batches. So the one thing we could control was if we have the ABV exactly the same through each batch, and then just let the Solera do its work in between. So this is one of the few things that we do reduce down in terms of strength and ABV, yeah. And don't ask why we picked 48.5. No, in fact, two reasons. One, because it's never been really used before. You've got 46, you've got 48, you've got 50. 48.5, we also kept putting water in, and it got to a point where that was anything lower than 48.5, the quality of the whiskey wasn't quite the same. The spark had gone. So that was the number we settled on.
Yeah, no, it's a great dram. I love blended malts. And the fact that there's a story behind the name and then the whole Solera system, I mean, it definitely has its uniqueness. So yeah, it's pretty tasty.
Good stuff. Yeah, I mean, again, we can only take so much credit for the actual blending because, we're certainly not going to tell any stories about how the blend came about. It was remnants. But you know what? There's something special about that we've actually made something so delicious and interesting. And I really mean that, as someone who has been drinking a lot of whiskey over their life, as you can see, I'm not that old, but I've had a hard paper round. But this is just something I would always have on my shelf. It's just so special, and I'm a sucker for a good story as well. So it captured my imagination, that's for sure.
Yeah, nice. All right, so we're gonna we have two more. Which way do we go? Torabhaig or Highland Peated?
I would say the Highland Peated. I think that's as I mentioned, we're back at the Teaninich. I don't get too precious in terms of peating level. I would rather maybe go with something that's going to.
Charles, the bottle you gave us says Tomatin peated 7-year, and the sheet says
the bottle label is wrong. This is the Highland Peated 9-year.
Okay.
Well, technically,
it is Tomatin, but
yeah, you're not wrong.
It's just a 9-year, not a 7-year.
Okay, the age wrong. Okay, so yeah, this is so we've called this Highland Peated or sometimes Peated Highland. Occasionally, you'll get an example of a distillery where they're happy to sell you their casks of whiskey, but they say, yes, you can bottle that, but please do not put our distillery name on the label. And it does happen from time to time. A lot of the different reasons for that. Sometimes it's if a distillery sells their whiskey to a broker, and they know that that broker is going to then sell that cask on to someone else, and they've got no idea where that cask is going to end up. So they get a bit precious about the whereabouts of that cask and what they might do to it.
I just noticed I have the wrong picture on the website, so just don't look at the picture of the bottle. I've got to fix that tomorrow.
Yeah,
I have the Teaninich.
Well spotted. And then, so for example, with Diageo and many of the distilleries that we buy direct from, they trust that we're going to do their whiskey a service, a credit, if you like. So they're happy for us to use their name. And then we buy from brokers as well, where we're not allowed to use their name. This one here we have bought from the distillery Tomatin, but the main code expression that they have of Tomatin, the main house style, that if you buy a bottle that's labelled Tomatin, is unpeated. But they also have a sister brand for the spirit that they produce that is peated, maybe for 1 month of the year, which is called Bocan, which is a completely different brand feel, brand look. And so they can only imagine that if someone was to pick up a bottle of this whiskey you have just now, and we have Tomatin on the label, and it's the first time they've ever tried Tomatin, they don't like the peat, and so therefore they put off for Tomatin for the rest of their life. So that's the reason why we're not allowed to put Tomatin on this, but certainly allowed to talk about it, as I've mentioned like 6 or 7 times so far. And so yeah, this is in an Octave as well. So this is a first fill, fresh Pedro Jimenez Octave. So a huge amount of the influence from the Pedro Jimenez, a huge amount of sweetness, raisins, sultanas, Christmas cake, wonderful flavours like that. And then this wonderful wave of smoke that comes through, that cuts right through that sweetness. And this is a journey of a whiskey that starts sweet and it ends up, this kind of smokiness that kind of lingers on and on as the sweetness fades away. Again, it's an Octave, so huge amount of fun, huge amount of character, real whiskey that stands out. Sometimes I call these whiskies like a room splitter, where you do a vote at the end and some people hate it, some people love it, but it certainly is memorable, and that's part of the beauty of this whiskey.
I've enjoyed the Kubakins in general. I think they're amazing releases. I mean, you never ever see an independent bottling of a Kubakin. I don't know, maybe I'm just not seeing it in the US, but I've never tasted an independent bottling of one before.
Yeah. Well, this is as close as you'll get, so I don't know if it's exactly the same peating level as they choose for the Kubakin.
Yeah.
But
those are pretty high.
Sorry?
I think they're pretty high ppm.
Oh yeah.
They're pretty smoky, the Kubakins.
Yeah. And they tend to bottle it quite young as well, with quite a heavy cask influence to keep that smoke higher, because of course the longer you leave a smoky whiskey, the more the peating and the smokiness dissipates. But yeah, just that question in the chat there about octaves. So Octave is just the size of the cask. So you've got octaves, barrels, butts, hogsheads. The Octave is the size of a cask. The name comes from like an eighth. So it's an eighth of a butt. So a butt's 500 litres. So this is 40, between 40 and 60 litres. So hence the reason why we only got 44 bottles from this, and the flavour's quite intense because of that. Yeah, smaller, faster maturation, much more oxidisation, much more loss, wood influence, and then the previous contents as well has a bigger influence on that spirit as well, which it's all in that glass. It's a big whiskey, ABV as well, carrying those flavours right through. So
I think it's delicious, especially for the price, $100. It's pretty good. And again, for something you don't see very often at all. And if you're a fan of Tomatin, I mean, this is part of that world. So
yeah, this is I've been keeping score. I don't have this as my highest score, but it might still be my favorite. I mean, I like the flavor profile. There's even floral notes on the nose that I'm getting, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I like that. I like how you say it might not get the highest score, but it might be your favourite whiskey. I think anybody who has even a modest collection of whiskies, they have the ones they know are the best quality, or to their mind is the best quality, but they've also got favourites as well. The ones that you might not bring out every day. You have to be in the mood. You have to, just be that person that you want to say, you have to try this. Have you ever tried anything like this before? And there's a wonderful place in the whiskey collection for bottles like that, that's for sure.
Yeah, this is a fun one. I wouldn't mind having a bottle of this on my shelf just to grab every once in a while.
Yeah. And we have put quite a lot of the peated Highland into octaves, because when we got the casks in, we just tasted it and thought, do you know what, this would just be perfect for these octaves, especially because we had a fresh batch on their way from the bodega. We knew we were going to be hit with 10 or 12 fresh Pedro Jimenez octaves, and we really have to think about what's going to go in those casks, and again be very careful that we don't swamp the spirit with the wood, the influence from these little octaves. So we tasted the few hogsheads we had of this peated Highland Tomatin, and thought that would be perfect. And Never one to say I told you so, but when we bottled this, we went, yep, we kind of know what we're doing. Not to sound like we're big-headed, but it's this experience. But also, customers are asking all the time. We like peat and sherry, especially when it is unique, exclusive casks like this, which really stand out. I mean, we love a first fill bourbon cask. A refill sherry, more subtle whiskies, more, where the quality really comes through. But as we were just discussing there's certainly a place for a memorable whiskey. I'll leave it at that. It's really big, memorable, hits certain spots that other whiskies don't come close to.
Yeah. The sweetness with the smoke is always a great thing, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, just as again a little background to the name, Lady of the Glen. I always like that, going to maybe not so much you guys, but whenever I do a tasting in a new place, I like to imagine that the people who bought a ticket, to a tasting with Lady of the Glen, and then they see me walk in, and I'm like, yep, sorry, not quite what you were expecting, but thankfully the whiskies are Lady of the Glen, so it's only going to make the whiskies look even better, that you have my face to present them. But the name comes from, and as I touched on before, we like to keep things with a connection. We're not good marketeers, so we're certainly not going to come up with the perfect label, the perfect name. But what we can do is connect it back to something that's important to us. And so Lady of the Glen is a hark back to Gregor when he was, before he founded the business, one of his favourite times when he moved out of the house and he was studying at university for the first time, and he'd moved to the town of Stirling. The history of Stirling really captured his imagination, and in particular Stirling Castle and the history of that. But the ghost stories of Stirling Castle, and one of the most commonly seen ghosts is the Green Lady, which is the case in many castles, but the Green Lady of Stirling Castle is one of the most commonly sighted ghosts in the whole of Scotland, which apparently was one of Mary Queen of Scots' handmaidens when she was staying at the castle. The handmaiden had a vision in the night of a fire engulfing Mary Queen of Scots' room, and she died in the fire. So she ran into the room and got Mary Queen of Scots out of that room, and sure enough, the fire then engulfed the room and killed the handmaiden, and she's now wandering the halls of Stirling Castle. Not a particularly, gruesome ghost or anything, or causing any havoc, but it is seen many times. So that inspired Gregor. But unfortunately, the word green, or the use of the word green with whiskey, is a negative connotation. It basically means it's like a whiskey that's not ready yet, or it's a bit young, it's a bit fresh. So that evolved from Green Lady to the Lady of the Glen, which at the time especially, but even now, there's certainly a space for a kind of feminine brand that has flowers on the bottle that fits into any shelf, even in these days as well. So that's the story of where the name comes from. And yeah, like I say, it's a big part of Gregor's life and Gregor's history as well, so it's quite nice. Okay. Is it the last but not least time for the Torabhaig?
Yes. Torabhaig.
Yeah. Hope you enjoyed this one, because this one was one of, well, I've said that already tonight, but one of my favourite whiskies that we bottled last year in particular. A couple of reasons for that. I'm a huge fan of this distillery. I think they're producing some wonderful spirit. But again, I didn't think in my time anyway, we would get to see a cask independently bottled. But sure enough, last year, the distillery released just a small number of casks out to independent bottlers for them to showcase the distillery and put their mark on it. And we were delighted to be able to get hold of a cask. Yes, it was young, 7 years old. It's a young whiskey, but we didn't get a sample. I picked up the cask, we brought it back to our warehouse, and basically we expected to maybe have to hold on to it for a couple of years, because 7 years it's going to be quite fresh. But as soon as we opened that cask and poured a couple of glasses, and everyone in the warehouse was just silent. It was just incredible. And everything that we loved about the distillery, everything I love about Torabhaig, really was in that glass. First fill bourbon cask, huge amount of sweetness, vanilla, honey, toffee coming from that fairly fresh American oak, and obviously the coconut flavors coming from the bourbon whiskey that was in there before. But just a perfect combination of the smokiness, and it's quite intense.
Oh, wow.
Torabhaig is a very high ppm. As far as I'm aware, they are distilling 80 parts per million barley, but they're not taking a lot of that heavy phenolic compounds across. So the final spirit is not as peaty as you would think in terms of the original specification of the barley. But for me, the intensity of the oak, intensity of the first fill bourbon influence, it's almost like it's taking the smoke that's there and giving it a boost, a turbocharged boost. But yeah, Torabhaig is as you mentioned, the second distillery on Skye, which is such a welcome addition because as much as I love Talisker as well, and it certainly has a place in my whiskey love and history, we can certainly welcome a second distillery changing things up and just adding a freshness to the concept of a Skye whiskey that has that style. Yeah, so absolutely delighted to get a hold of this one. Again, it was part of our Samhain series, like the Deanston. It came in the different bottle shape with the different label. This one was all about the formation of Skye itself, which the legend goes was giants were fighting and wrestling each other, and as the giants fell to the ground, it was them that created the wonderful landscape that Skye is famous for. So that was the story we went with that one. So yeah, hope you enjoy this one. This one, as I say, was one of my favourite whiskies from last year, both in terms of the surprise factor of this cask, well exceeding our expectations, and just in general, just showcasing how wonderful this spirit can be. It's quite interesting though that I think a lot of the new distilleries have produced spirit that is better or is very good at such a young age. They need the money as soon as possible. They need to get whiskey out there bottled as soon as possible. So it's in their interest to produce a whiskey that's bottled very young is still very good. But also I think that extra dynamic there is the fact that with heavily peated whiskies like this, when they're so young, you retain a lot of that peat and smoke, which dissipates over time. So you're really capturing the essence of that smokiness and that peaty flavour that's coming through. So nice one to follow on from the peated Highland, because I think it was mentioned that the mainland peat in whiskies is slightly different than that from the islands. We get a lot more of that coastal character coming through, which for me, this one's the case here. Yeah, quite a high ABV as well, 60.4. You wouldn't know that. This one definitely falls into that dangerous whiskey category. Dangerous, what do I mean by that? Well, you could sit down with some good company, as we are tonight, something good on the television or some good sport event with some good friends, open the bottle, and before you know it, you've drank half the bottle because you can't tell that ABV, which is fine until you go and try and stand up. And then you find out. And of course, I'm just speculating here. That's not coming from experience in the slightest. That's just my imagination running wild. But that's, to me, is the definition of a dangerous whiskey, when it's that good and that drinkable at that high ABV.
Yeah, those are the dangerous ones for sure.
And the sign of a good cask as well that takes that, because essentially 60.4, it's not quite as simple or as brutal as this, but 60.4% flavour, and 39.6% water. It's not quite as simple as that, but basically you're getting a cask that's turning that alcohol into flavour, and that's why you can't get the alcohol burn. Mm-hmm. And it's simply just the fats and the oils coming from that maturation that's really taking that alcohol and turning it into flavour. But it's also, in a slightly sinister way, tricking your senses into not noticing that alcohol, because you're not getting that, the warning signs that this is high alcohol, because you're tasting flavour, which is the main factor there.
It's also our seventh dram too. So
perfect. 7 and 7. It's a lucky number somewhere.
All right. We do need to let Paul go to sleep, and I need to crawl into bed myself. I'm barely sitting here at this point, but I'm going to quickly go through the room, just top two, quick, and turn your microphones on. So let's start with Mike and Lori. You're on my screen, top left.
Hello, the Blair Athol, which I just ordered, and the Deanston.
Nice. How about you, Lori?
Yep, same thing.
Okay, same thing. You guys are two peas in a pod. All right, Gil.
I'm going to go with the Deanston and the Torabhaig.
Nice. All right. Dennis?
The Deanston and the Auchroisk, whatever.
Yeah, Auchroisk.
Steve?
Teaninich and Torabhaig, the last one.
Torabhaig. Nice.
I can't pronounce it.
All right. I think we might, except for St. All right, Quaid?
Deanston was my first one. The rest of them are all good, but I'd probably have to say the Auchroisk.
Okay. Brad?
Yeah, that was I really enjoyed the Teaninich and the Deanston. I really like that sweetness.
Okay. Nice. Shalom?
Blair Athol #1 and the Highland Peated Bocan #2.
Nice. All right. Larry?
I thought there's no more Deanston available.
Yeah, you're muted, Larry.
Good.
It's okay. We'll come back to you, Larry. Luke. Oh, there you go, Larry.
Oh, sorry. Teaninich and the Auchroisk.
Okay. All right. Luke.
Oh, Teaninich and Blair Athol.
Look at all these Teaninichs. Now we're all saying it correctly. Teaninichs. I learned something tonight, big time. All right, Connor.
I think Tomatin and the Deanston as well.
Nice. Those are so great. Jim.
Blair Athol and Tomatin.
All right. Jeff. I mean, I know you came late, so maybe you didn't do all of them. But...
Didn't do all of them, but yeah, definitely the Tomatin is by far my #1, a little bit different. What was the name for this style again?
Bocan.
Bocan, thank you.
Yeah. Alan.
Deanston was #1. I could easily live with the Ashrock, the Teaninich, and the Blair Athol.
Nice.
But
right. A bunch of them.
Yeah.
Good stuff. All right, Bradley. If you're there.
When we tried, and also the St. Bridget's Kirk.
Nice. All right. We did get a St. Bridget's Kirk. All right. So we basically covered the table, which is a true sign of a great tasting. When we have every whiskey mentioned, Bradley saved the day on the end. If he didn't say St. Bridget's Kirk, I was going to say it. So I'm just kidding. But all really great whiskeys. Paul, thank you so much. I know you're used to this, but it's still, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do a midnight tasting. I'm way past that point. So really appreciate you coming online with us. And we look forward to having you back again with some newer releases as well.
Yeah, no problem. No, anytime. It's just to say, it's mainly wonderful to share some drams with some like-minded people, tell some stories, but also show some support as well. You know, the work that you guys do, Charles and the guys at the First Fill Spirits in the shop as well, and Howard and Melissa, our importers. You know, the work that we can't do in that market. So you guys are. I'm the brand ambassador, but you're our ambassadors out there in the market as well. So anything I can do to support that, and obviously share some stories and share some drams as well is always a pleasure. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, if anybody didn't get a bottle that they wanted because we're out or whatever, just reach out to me. I might be able to get more. I don't know. I'll find out and bring in more. So if there was one that you really wanted, or 2 or 3, just let me know, and we'll try to make it happen. So, all right, guys, we're going to call it a night. I'm going to crawl in bed and say good night, and hope you enjoyed tonight. But
thank you, Paul. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you,
Good night, guys.
Thanks, guys. Awesome job.